Hello. So why the fuss about serverless? Before I start, a couple of words of warning. I'm a scientist by training, so I also use kitten pictures. This is my kitten scientist. Because I'm a scientist, I like data and I like graphs. So I've done a quick graph. This is the level of audience pain, that's you, against the number of slides given in a 50-minute presentation. I reckon there's a safe limit of about 60. Seeing I like to experiment, I'll be using no less than 232. The second warning I want to give you is I'm going to start by talking about the concept of strategy and situational awareness. And then I'm going to get on to this whole issue of serverless and the semi-religious wars which are starting to appear. So I'm going to talk about strategy to begin with, and I'm going to do it in a personal sense. When I used to be the CEO of a company called Fatango, just here. It was an online photo service, relatively small. This is 2004, 16 different lines of business, several million users, that sort of thing. And we were very profitable, lots of revenue, doing very, very well, except for there was one problem with this company. And that problem was me. I was the CEO, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So rather than being sort of like a chess-playing sort of master, I had things like vision statements. Our strategy is customer focus. We will lead an innovative effort of the market through our use of agile techniques and open source, all this sort of exciting stuff. But this was basically nicked from other people, other CEOs of other software companies. This was 2003. My problem was rather than being over here, I was over here. I was the alchemist CEO. I was just sort of making it up as I went along. And I was very worried that people would start to discover that I was the fake CEO. I was suffering from that whole imposter syndrome. So I used to go around recording other CEOs talking about strategy. And I came up with, I do this every couple of years, I used to record the small words they would say, what I call business level abstractions of a healthy strategy, or BLAs for short. And these are the sort of common BLAs when I did this in 2014 that people talk about. Things like digital business, disruptive, innovative, collaborative, competitive advantage, ecosystem, open source, etc. And then I would combine all these people's strategy documents together and generate a sort of BLA template. Our strategy is blah. We will lead a blah effort of the market through our use of blah and blah to build a blah. Blah, blah, blah. And then I would combine the two together, the blahs and the blah templates, and also generate a bunch of different sort of random strategies. It's all gibberish, but I thought I'd go through them. So number one is our strategy is customer focus. We will lead a disruptive effort of the market through our use of innovative social media and collaborative and big data to build a collaborative cloud-based ecosystem. Again, it's all random gibberish. Number two that came up was our strategy is innovative digital business. We will lead a growth effort of the market through our use of customer-focused competitive advantage and disruptive. I can barely say the words, it's so awful. But I would send them around to people, and I got about 400 responses. Three basic types. This is the exact wording from our business plan. The second one was, I've seen two of these used already. And my third and favorite one is, are you for hire? So a friend of mine's put this all online. This is strategy as a service, by the way. The URL's just at the bottom. This is one, you just go to the site, it automatically generates you one. And it's all random gibberish, but it seems to fit what goes on in the market. So back in 2004, 2005, being this fake CEO of this very successful little company, I started to suspect that other people didn't understand the environment. Other people were being fake CEOs. I wasn't the only one. So I went all the way back to first principles. Sun Tzu. Anybody know what Sun Tzu wrote? Fabulous. So Sun Tzu talked about 5 factors that mattered in competition. First, understand your purpose, your scope, your moral imperative, why you are, your mission, why you're trying to do something. The second thing, understand your landscape, the environment that you exist within. The third, understand climatic patterns, so those things that impact the environment. Then you orientate yourself around it, and then you get into you orientate with Doctrine, then you get into leadership, which is context-specific gameplay. I thought, wow, that sort of makes sense. And then I came across John Boyd. Anybody know what John Boyd did? No? OODA loops, US Air Force pilots. So John Boyd talked about the game, so that's your purpose, then the importance of observing the environment, so that's the landscape and the climactic patterns that impact it, and then you get into, orientating with Doctrine, and lastly, you get into decision and acting. And I was quite excited by this because it started to sort of make sense, and so I would go and tell this to other people, and they would say, well, really, strategy is all about the importance of why. I thought, wow, that's interesting, but there's 2 whys. There's the why of purpose, as in I want to be the best online photo service, whatever it happens to be, and then there's the why of movement. Why am I making this choice over that choice? And they're very, very different things. So if you think about a game of chess, your why of purpose is to win the game, and your why of movement is why make this move over that move. And it's through acting and through movement that we actually learn. So I went back to my little online photo business. There we were, 2005, at the beginning of. And I thought, well, we sort of have a purpose. Well, we've got 16 different lines of business. We're being successful. We're making lots of money. How did I understand the landscape? And this got me into a subject called situational awareness. And to explain it, I'm going to use 3 stories: the Vikings, chess, and Themistocles. So Vikings, very frightening. The way Vikings used to navigate is through the use of stories, epic stories. So from Herman Head due west towards Half, and you will have sailed north of Hatland, and so that you will just glimpse it in clear weather, etc. You'd spend 10, 15 years learning these stories before you were put in charge of a boat. Now that is simply that. That's all that means. It's much easier with a map. And we know this ourselves because when people ask us directions, if they've got GPS, we point it out, or they got a map, we point out where to go. And if they don't, we give them a story: up the road, turn left, turn right, and they disappear off, and we're left with that moment, did I send them in the right direction? So, quick question. What would you use to navigate? Would you use a map, visual map, or a verbal story? What would you do? Good. What do we use in business? Stories. Excellent. Right, so the second example is chess world. I want you to imagine you live in a world where everybody plays chess, and how well you play the game determines your success in this world. But no one's ever seen a chessboard. All you've ever seen are these characters on the screen. And you play the game very simply. You press a button, pawn. Your opponent sees what you've pressed. You counter, they counter, you counter, and the game goes on for ages until it's a draw or somebody wins. Now, what will happen is we will take these sequences of games, many thousands of them, feed them into our big data systems, and come up with secrets of success. So if you press queen, I should respond with knight and rook. And we do this in business all the time. You look in the copies of most of the business management magazines, things like HBR, how earlobes can signify leadership potential. It's phrenology of management. Then one day you're going to play a game of chess against somebody who will see something truly remarkable. What they're going to see is the board. And you're going to move, and they're going to counter, and you're going to move, and they're going to counter, and you're going to lose. And you'll be sitting there going, what the fiddlesticks happened there? How did I lose that game so quickly? I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. I've got all my big data systems. They've only been playing for 2 weeks. The first thing you're going to do is copy that sequence down as some sort of magic secret of success. You're still going to lose. Then you're going to say, is it the speed at which they press the button? You're still going to lose. You'll start saying, is it cultural? Are they a happy sort of person? You're still going to lose. You're going to lose because you exist in what's known as a low level compared to a high level situational awareness environment. So what would you use to learn? Secrets of success or context-specific play? What do you think? Context-specific play. Good. What do we use in business? Secrets of success. So the last one, Themistocles, ancient politician, Greek general, had a problem. Persians were invading. What he decided to do was to block off the streets of Artemisium, force the Persians along the coastal road into a narrow pass known as Thermopylae, where a small number of troops could defend against a large force. There were about 170,000 Persians, about 4,000 Greeks, including 300. Excellent, you know the story. Right, I want you to imagine you're a member of the Athenian army. So you're part of the Greek states. I'm Themistocles, and I'm giving you purpose and moral imperative. We're going to defend against the invading horde of the Persians. But then I say to you, I do not understand the landscape. I do not understand the environment. I have no map, but have no fear, for I have created a SWOT diagram. Strengths. A well-trained Spartan army, a high level of motivation not to become a Persian slave. The weaknesses, the E4s might stop the Spartans turning up. A truckload of Persians are turning up. Opportunities, get rid of the Persians, get rid of the Spartans. We're Athenian, we actually hate the Spartans. And threats, the Persians get rid of us. And the oracle says a really dodgy film might be produced in a few thousand years. So, what would you use to communicate and determine strategy in battle? Position and movement described by a map or a magic framework like a SWOT? Sorry? Okay, what do we use in business? Magic framework. So I'm going to go back to the chess player versus the alchemy. If I look at navigation, learning, and strategy, then chess is visual, it's context specific. It's all about position and movement. It's what we call a high-level situational awareness environment. It's a bit like the military. If you ask a general, why did they bombard a hill? They won't say because 67% of other generals are bombing hills, therefore that's what I did. Or that I read an article in General Weekly that bombing hills was the new thing, or that bombing hills would make a good story, or because that's what Uber would do. It's all about position and movement. Now, alchemy is all about storytelling, secrets of success, magic frameworks. It's all low-level situational awareness environment. It's a non-learning environment. And that's where I was as this fake CEO. I was being successful against other companies, making lots of money, but I didn't have a clue, and I wasn't learning. How many of your companies do you think are more in the alchemy, more in the... Who thinks they're border chess-playing masters? Not one. One. Who thinks it's more in the alchemy? Okay. So the difference between these environments is the existence of the non-existence of a map. But maps have very specific characteristics. So what makes a map is it's visual. It's context-specific. It's the battle at hand. You've got the position of pieces relative to some form of anchor. In the geographical map, the anchor is the compass, so this is north, south, east, or west of this. You have consistency of movement, how to get from Thebes to Thermopylae, and you have components. They're very good for collaboration, communication, and learning. Turns out a chessboard is also a map. It's visual, it's context-specific, it's position, it's got an anchor, the board itself, so the position is like B1 or B2. You've got consistency of movement. Turns out a tube map is actually a map. The anchor is the tube network, You've got the position of stations relative to that network, and you've got consistency of movement. And it's context-specific. So this is a map of London Underground. And if I go from Westminster to South Kensington, I'll go through set number of stations. I won't take the journey one day and suddenly discovered a new station has appeared and then disappears the following day. So there I was in 2005 thinking, okay, I can see that, but we have maps. We have lots of maps in business. I have things like system maps. Anyone seen one of these before? You've never seen a system map? Okay, a bunch of box and wire diagram connecting different pieces. The problem is, if I take a piece and I move it, does it change the meaning of this map? And the answer is no. If you do that with a geographical map, of course. If you shift France and put it next to Australia, it's changed the meaning. But not with a system map. And that's because it's not a map. I also have business process maps. Anybody seen one of these? Yes, they're brilliant, except for they're not maps either. They don't have position, they don't have consistency of movement. I also had digital road maps. Anyone seen one of these recently? They're great because they're not maps either. I had things like mind maps. Ever heard of a mind map? Guess what? It's not a map either. As inconceivable as it seems to be, we keep on using that word, but I do not think it means what we think it means. And without a map, you can't learn about an environment, a changing environment. So how do you create a map? So this was my problem in 2005. And I sat down, and I first of all had a cup of tea. And it's while I was having a cup of tea, I realized that a cup of tea has needs. Well, I first of all needed a cup of tea, but it needs tea and hot water. And hot water needs a kettle, and it needs cold water, and a kettle needs power. So if I focus on the user at the top as my anchor, I can create a chain of needs, and that gives me position. So that's the first thing I did. I took one of my systems maps or network topologies. I focused on the anchor, what is the customer and their needs, created a chain of needs of those components, and hence a value chain. So customer required online photo storage, website required a platform, compute data center, power. Wow. Unfortunately, that turns out to be still fairly useless because it doesn't have the concept of movement or change. So if you look at somebody like Nokia, it was a paper mill, became a plastics manufacturer, became a telecommunications company, is becoming something different today. So I need to understand movement. So I took one point, power, went back in history. You got the Parthian battery, first ever battery, all the way to Tesla and Westinghouse, utility provision of electricity, 1886, started to examine how things evolved. And the reason for that is evolution equals change equals movement. And it turns out there's a common path by which things evolve. Not only just for activities, but practices and data and even knowledge itself. So it's all driven by demand and supply competition. You start off with the genesis of something. It's rare, poorly understood on a scale of ubiquity and certainty. Then you get custom-built examples, products, rental services, commodity, and utility services. So I was able to take my value chain, flatten that evolution curve at the bottom, genesis, custom-built product, commodity, put things into position, and lo and behold, I have a map. That was in 2005. To which the question is, so what? Why does that matter? Well, if I understand the landscape, or at least can observe it, now I can observe common climatic patterns, or the economic patterns that hit us. And there's about 27 of these, and they're the rules that influence the game. So the first one you learn is everything's evolving. Your map, if there is supply and demand competition, is constantly driving from left to right. The second thing you learn is characteristics change. Everything starts off in this uncharted space where it's chaotic, uncertain, unpredictable, and then through supply and demand competition, it becomes industrialized, ordered, standard. Doesn't matter whether it's computing money or penicillin. The next thing you learn is there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all methodology. So we'd gone all agile about 2001, 2002, and had learned it didn't work everywhere by about 2004. Turns out agile in-house is very good at focus on reducing the cost of change. So XP, but very lightweight, but it's weak in comparison to something like Six Sigma in the industrialized space, because what it's good at is focusing on reducing deviation, polar opposites. And of course, in the middle, you need something which is all about learning and reducing waste. So we were trying to use RUP. Lean startup, I think, is much better. So we learned that one size doesn't fit all. Then we learned that we had inertia to change because of past success. So Blockbuster, Netflix, who was first with a website? First with a website? Blockbuster, right. Who was first with video ordering online? Blockbuster, yes. Who was first with experimenting with video streaming online? Blockbuster, yes. Who went bankrupt first? Blockbuster, yes. So everybody says, oh, you don't want to be uninnovative. What do you mean? They out-innovated everyone. The problem is their pre-existing business model created inertia to the change. Do you know what it was about their business model that got them? Late fees. Do you remember the video cassettes? Some of you may not. The video cassettes we used to take back, they used to make money. If we kept them at home, you don't get that with the video streaming. So anyway, you start to learn these 27 common economic patterns, and what you discover is you can now start to anticipate obvious and predictable change. So there I was in 2005 with our map. We knew that compute was going to go to a utility. I thought it was going to be Google. Turned out it was Amazon the next year. We knew platform would go to a utility. We knew we'd have inertia. There's about 16 different forms of that. And we knew it would enable higher order systems to appear. And that's great from the point of view of investment. So did I want to invest here, or here, or here, or maybe just try and differentiate with one of my online photo services? Of course, when I said this to everybody, they would go, oh, cloud is for startups, when it finally appeared. And, you'd say it'll dominate the market in 10 to 15 years. It's a common economic pattern. And of course, they all respond, burn him, heretic. It's not going to be the case. So once you start to understand your landscape and climatic patterns and you can anticipate, then you move on to doctrine, which is how you organize yourself. These are the universally applicable principles regardless of context. And they're very simple things. So it's like flanking and firing. So if you're in the military, flanking is a context-specific move. So you do that when an opponent is in a particular position, whereas firing is universally useful. So you don't want to be in the middle of a battle and say, oh, we're going to need suppressive fire, and have to send your soldiers off to learn how to shoot a gun. You want to have done that stuff beforehand. So that's the difference between universal and context-specific. So universal things are things like focus on user needs. Turns out, surprise, that's a good idea. The second thing is remove bias and duplication. So one of the things about maps, if you have several, like we have borders and police and immigration, and you share the maps, you start to discover we're rebuilding the same thing. Now, I always thought government was the center of waste and bias in IT organizations. I can happily say the worst example of duplication I found in government is 118 teams building exactly the same thing. However, that's nothing compared to the private sector. So in the private sector, I have my IT weapons of mass duplication. I had a global pharma, 300 teams building enterprise content management systems, and 5 global efforts to build the global enterprise content management system, none of which knew the others existed. Spectacular. I've got a bank, they've got 1,000 risk management systems. They sit there saying they can't innovate. They are brilliant, at innovation. They just keep on rebuilding the wheel in a slightly different shade of blue. Okay, so you have a map, you start to remove bias and duplication, then you start to apply methods. And what you discover is the stuff on the right you outsource, the stuff in the middle, off-the-shelf products, stuff on the left you use agile in-house techniques. So HS2, high-speed rail, big, heavy engineering project. Trying to organize it like this, turn it into a map, apply multiple methods. That's 2011, 2012. Simple stuff. Do you know what a world perception server is? It's part of a self-driving car. I'm going to pretend you're all part of finance, so IT is elvish to you. And what I'm going to do is take a box and wire diagram for a self-driving car, and I've turned it all into elvish. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Should we outsource or build our own? Should we outsource or build our own? What do you think? Any ideas? That's the sort of question we have all the time. I'm going to turn it into a map. I'm going to ask you the same thing. Should we outsource or build our own? Right. Should we outsource or build our own? Right. Suddenly you've got context. Turn it back into English. GPS, world perception server. Pretty basic stuff. So back in Tango, there we are. We had our map. Started using appropriate methods. Thinking small, breaking things down. Constrain it into small contracts. That comes from FIST. Fast and expensive, simple and tidy. US Air Force. So the US Air Force and Special Operations Command realized there was better ways of building things. You break it down into small components. They used it for the Harvest Hawk, which was a Marine combat aircraft. That went from paper to combat operations in 18 months, firing its first shot in 19 months. For military hardware, that's fast. So then you start using small teams, cell-based structures. Then you start realizing that in these small teams, engineering over here is not the same as engineering over here. You not only require an aptitude for engineering or finance or marketing, you require an attitude. These people are very good at exploring the chaotic, the uncertain world, but half of what they produce barely works. These people are brilliant at making success happen. These people are brilliant at building the empires of scale and industrializing components. So you end up having multiple cultures in a single organization and designing a system which copes with constant evolution and uses a concept known as theft. Now, this is actually old stuff, comes from 1993, Robert Cringely's book, Accidental Empires. GCHQ, our intelligence services, very kindly open source Boiling Frogs, which is a document which tells you about how to organize in such a manner. So, there you are. You now understand your landscape, you're learning climatic patterns, you're starting to anticipate, you're starting to orientate yourself around. With Doctrine, there's about 40 different forms. Then you start to get into, finally, leadership and context-specific gameplay. So these are context-specific forms of gameplay. So these are the flanking versus firing bits. So I had my map. 2005, we know it's all going to a utility. We know where we could invest. The question now becomes, can we manipulate the map to our favor? It turns out there's all sorts of ways of manipulation, about 70. You can use open source to drive things to a more industrialized form, fear, uncertainty, and doubt to basically play on other people's inertia to change. There's the use of constraints, all sorts of wonderful techniques. And so you apply that and you build what's known as a context-specific form of gameplay. So there we were, online photo service, using the map, and we realized that the best thing for us to do was to build the world's first ever platform as a service. Now that was a true platform as a service. Code execution environment, JavaScript front and back end. It's with functional billing. You had no concept of the underlying infrastructure or anything along those lines. We anticipated somebody would make a utility play. I thought it was going to be Google, turned out it was Amazon. We were like, yeah, Amazon, brilliant, that was fantastic. And there's a whole ecosystem model known as ILC, which is a way of exploiting other people building on top. So, very simple. The next thing you do is act, and that's what we did. We launched the world's first platform as a service. or what you would now call a serverless environment. It was great. It grew like hotcakes. We were like, yay, Amazon launches, yay. Unfortunately, the parent company had some consultants in, and they said the three things that we were doing, 3D printing, the use of mobile phones as cameras, and this cloud stuff, was not the future. The future was instead 3D television. So we shut it all down and spent large amounts of money on 3D TV. Anybody own a 3D TV? Anybody use one? Okay. So I went to a company called Canonical. Ever heard of Ubuntu? Who's heard of Ubuntu? Yay! So we mapped it all out, 2008, used that to attack the market. That's where we were against Red Hat Windows. We were 70% of cloud by 2010. Really simple. Then I went to government, started working in all sorts of government departments and stuff for government, wrote the Better for Less paper. These days I do lots of nation-state competition stuff, so China impact on USA. Now, most of the time people say, gosh, this is all incredibly complex. Actually, it isn't. What it is unfamiliar. We like magic frameworks because they're familiar to us, they're easy. We have to apply a lot more thought when it comes to a map. Same with stories. Vikings weren't stupid to use epic stories. They were just unfamiliar with the concept of a map. So serverless. What does this all mean for serverless? Well, let's go through what's been happening. Compute. It was a product. When it was a product, we used to build applications with emerging architectural practices, because not only activities evolved, but also practices, and these were based upon the characteristics of a product. It's a high MTTR, high mean time to recovery. So when your server went bang, it would take you weeks to get a new one. So we had practices like scale up, bigger machines, N+1, disaster recovery tests. Do you all remember those? And they evolved and became best practice for that world. And then what happened is compute evolved and became more of a utility. And it had a different set of characteristics. And of course, everybody wanted to take advantage of the efficiency. They wanted to go and say, you know, make my legacy cloudy. And people would start sticking their stuff on Amazon. Amazon would have an outage, and they'd all run around saying, the end of cloud is nigh. To which we'd go, but shouldn't our architecture evolve as well? To which they would go, burn him heretic. But the thing is, our architecture did evolve to take advantage of those characteristics, low MTTR. So we built distributed systems, not scale up, but scale out, designed for failure, chaos engines, all that sort of stuff. And they evolved, and that's standard co-evolution. We've now given it a name, DevOps. Oh, when was that? That was about 2008, 2009. This sort of practice started to emerge before that, but we gave it a name, and it was great. And a new tribe was formed. And of course, there was resistance from the past because of their past practice. That always creates inertia. And the new tribe was formed, and we talked about how it's all marvelous. It's all about user needs, measurement, iterative cycles, automation, collaboration, all that good stuff. And of course, people would go, but so was ITIL. And we'd go, burn him, heretic, that sort of thing. It's fairly standard. Well, anyway, the same is going on with platform now. So platform was very much in the product space. It was all about product stacks, LAMP stack, .NET stack, whatever it happens to be. It's now shifting to a much more utility environment, so what we would call a code execution environment or serverless. And so we're getting in a new emerging architectural practice built on top of that. And that's just standard co-evolution. It's happened in manufacturing, happened in finance, it's happened in all sorts of industries. And it recently happened to us with DevOps. So that's where you should be investing. Focus on utility platform environments like serverless, and focus on the novel emerging practices, which we're not quite 100% sure what they will be. But can we take a guess at what these new emerging practices will be? Well, I can, because though it's an unexplored area, I happen to have built Zimkey. And so we went through this. So I can tell you what happened. And most of this, the change of characteristic, was related to the obscurity of cost. So to explain, I had a project called Large Format Printer. A particular client, they wanted to sell large numbers of these machines. They cost about 2,000 euros a pop. Problem is, it's the usual sort of thing. We're sitting down, they want to write a contract specification. I know what's going to happen. We'll agree a specification, we'll go and build something, and then we'll end up fighting and arguing over the specification rather than focusing on what we should be doing, which is selling large format printers. So what I did was introduce a system of worth-based development. So the client, what they really wanted was leads, lots of them. So what did the customer need? They wanted to test a printer, so we needed a testing application. They needed to find out about the printers, so we needed a microsite. We needed a platform to build this all on, and we needed some sort of distribution mechanism. So when they tested out the printer, they would get a print, and it would tell them all the wonderful benefits of spending several thousand euros and buying one. That was great. A distribution mechanism as well. We had flows in this. Very simple. There's financial flows, other forms of capital from one node to another, which means we can add metrics, conversion rates, indirect, cost per distributed print. This is all 2005, 2006. But there was a problem. And the problem was the platform was a stepwise non-variable component. What does I mean by that? I mean that we had to spend a bunch of money building this environment. So I had to invest a chunk. And of course, if it became popular, we might need a different architecture. So there was going to be a stepwise jump. So you have to do lots of scenario planning, and there's lots of risk-taking involved. Well, one of the beauties about it becoming a platform is it all becomes functional. As a utility platform, it's all functional costs. So it smooths out your investment. So what you start to discover is that by shifting to serverless environment, it not only enables things like worth-based development, which is an entire different way of doing business, which is fantastic. It also suddenly creates financial value for refactoring. Because what we discovered back then was that we'd have these big code bases, and it was 2 or 3 functions within the code base which was consuming most of our resource and cost. We'd never been able to see that granularity of information before. So rather than investing, say, in marketing, it turned out more financially viable often to invest in refactoring. So it changed our whole approach to how we actually did development. And then we started monitoring different by flow of financial value within the system. And of course, having a platform, a utility platform, accelerated the speed at which we developed. Code reuse. I mean, in the past, we always had the promise of code reuse, but not really much of the reality. This changed that. And so that's what's going on with this whole space at the moment. And you will expect to see the sort of billion-dollar company built, which all it does is provide one function to other people. Anyway, so we're starting to see already a new tribe form, combining sort of financial skills and engineering skills in that space. It's very early stages. Doesn't even have its own meme yet. I mean, people talk about things like no-ops and all the rest of it. They're the wrong memes. We haven't got a title for it yet. They'll eventually figure out. And of course, we're going to have inertia to this change caused by, legacy architectural practices. They'll have inertia in terms of infrastructure, architectural practices in terms of coding. They're going to have inertia to this change. Even DevOps itself, because it's less visible, it's lower behind the line. People have made success in this space. They're going to have inertia. Of course, they're going to try and own that space, say, oh, we're going to evolve. But the new generation, the new tribe, oh, it's like a child, isn't it? The new child appears, it says to the parents, I'm nothing like you. I'm different, even though I've inherited genes from you. I didn't really inherit genes from you. I'm totally different. We did it with ITIL. Of course, if you say DevOps is a future legacy, the normal response is burn him, heretic. Tribe's got a tribe. So, quick summary. Strategy is an iterative cycle. It's not a nice linear path. It's a constant process of acting. Through acting, you actually learn about an environment. Movement is an essential part of learning, but it's also important to understand the landscape as you go along. Deng Xiaoping described it as crossing the river by feeling the stones. Have a purpose and direction, you take small steps, you understand more about the environment, and you take more steps. By doing that, you start to discover common economic patterns, and common forms of doctrine, and common forms of gameplay. Those gameplays are context-specific, the doctrine are universal, the economic patterns occur from one landscape to another. Apply those patterns to something like what's going on with compute. Yes, we had co-evolution of practice with the activity, hence DevOps. We're now going to see the same thing occur within the platform space. And of course, we're going to have inertia. And that's perfectly normal. That's just how things develop. Learning more about maps, by the way, all of this stuff is Creative Commons. I made it Creative Commons 12 years ago. I assumed everybody else in the world was mapping. I subsequently discovered, it took me about 5 to 6 years to discover that people actually didn't understand their landscape, which was quite shocking. We're starting to do map camps. Well, I say we're starting to do map camps. I tweeted I was going to be in London. Anybody want to learn how to map? And within a couple of hours, 100 volunteers create an entire conference, which was really nice of them. A wonderful community effort. Fortunately, sold out. We also, the company I work for, provides some online training, video courses. It's like $75 or something. That's the discount code. Takes about 2 weeks for you to learn the basics of mapping. So that's me, and thank you.